Good afternoon. Welcome to the Monday afternoon update on the tropics here. We're going to be discussing Marco for about 5 seconds here, and then we'll discuss Laura. As always, these thoughts are mine alone, and I'm making decisions regarding each system here. Please refer to the National Hurricane Center, your local weather office, and your local officials. I'm a big picture guy. When discussing stuff about your specific region, please refer to your local officials for all the latest details regarding evacuation orders and watches and warnings for your area. Well, here we have Marco here, and I want to briefly summarize what happened here with Marco. Last night it was decoupled significantly, and the shear was able to blast off all the convection that you can see here now approaching Alabama and Florida. And that convection is now well removed from the lower level circulation here, you can see, and that as a result is turning more to the west here and is likely to diminish and become a remnant low pretty soon. This is barely clinging on to tropical storm status at the moment and will likely be downgraded pretty soon, probably tonight. And as a result, the storm will likely have advisories discontinued. And all watches and warnings along the Louisiana coastline and the Mississippi Gulf coastline have all been discontinued. So, yeah. Okay, we're done with that. We're going to get into Laura now. This is Laura here, a much better organized system, and is quite frankly becoming much more organized than anticipated. We mentioned yesterday about how it had more water time here now that it was passing south of Cuba, and it has been able to organize as expected here. And if we get a closer shot of this storm here, you can see a couple of things. One, you have significant banding developing on the southern side here, and you have several strong thunderstorms here going into a core that is embedded somewhere in here and is moving off to the west-northwest towards the mountains of Cuba here. And we still have not seen that key interaction with Cuba yet. However, we will likely see that pretty soon as this is going to be passing over. And we'll see what this looks like probably later tonight and into tomorrow morning, what this looks like as it exits Cuba here. We will unfortunately lose radar on the system as it moves into the Gulf, but we have a pretty good depiction of what the core looks like now. If we look at the Cuban radar here, you can see a couple of things as the storm comes into view here on the Cuban radar. You can see a couple of banding features heading into the storm and a nascent kind of core developing here. And you can see there is a little bit of a hint of like an eye of sorts here. And what has largely prevented this from rapidly organizing, if you go back to the visible shot here, is the convectively anemic north side here. There's not a lot of thunderstorms on this side of the storm, and that is largely due to the interaction with Cuba. And so this has not been able to rapidly organize of sorts, but it has become much more organized today than even most models had actually expected. The HWRF model, which had been nailing the overall presentation of the system, had actually not forecast this, and so it was not able to grasp the amount of organization that this actually was able to undergo today. And so we may be dealing with a stronger system here as this enters the Gulf of Mexico. And if it is able to keep a semblance of this kind of nascent core structure here, this curved band that is trying to develop here and become a formative core here, if it is able to keep that structure, then it will likely be able to strengthen a lot faster here over the Gulf of Mexico than some models are currently forecasting. If we look at the GFS model here, you can see, if we go back a little bit here, you can see the storm emerging off of Cuba as a disorganized system here, weighted significantly to the south. If you look at the convective presentation here, you can see all the storms are well removed to the south, and this may be in response to some northerly mid-level shear that is being imposed upon the system right now, but it is not doing too much to the overall organization of the system. And so, as of right now, this may, change if the interaction with Cuba does indeed prove bad for the system. We will see how that goes. But the GFS has the storm struggle to really develop too much here, and actually doesn't deepen this too much until it is around the central Gulf. And what this short-term track means is that it will likely track a little further to the east here because it is weaker, and we'll get into that in a minute. If we look at the GFS continuing on, you can see that it does rapidly deepen this, but it is far too late as this is rounding the ridge now and is heading directly into Louisiana. Whether or not this actually struggles within the next 24 to 36 hours is very crucial to the overall track of the system. If we look at the steering layer here, we have competing flows out of the southeast from the lower levels, and as you get into the mid levels of the system, of the track, or of the atmosphere, you get winds out of the east. This is also shearing the storm, but at the same time, this is also guiding the storm. If the storm manages to get deeper here, then it will also feel the upper level steering here, which is also out of the east. If you average out the steering layers here in the mid-levels and lower levels, you largely get a west-northwestward track here, and a slightly north of that kind of heading here. If you average out the deeper steering layer all the way up into the upper levels, you get a far more westward, west-northwestward track. And so this small deviation in track leads to a significant difference in the landfall point here. And this is still days away here, but hurricane watches are already up for the Texas coast and the Louisiana coast, and you can see the forecast cone includes the northeastern Texas coast here and the southwestern Louisiana coast here. This may change, and we will see, again, there's still a degree of uncertainty here as to how exactly this looks. If this is able to strengthen quicker here and just, be able to take off sooner, this 2 p.m. Tuesday shot of a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm here may not verify, and the National Hurricane Center mentions that they are the most conservative forecast on intensity out of the general intensity guidance, because if you look at some of the intensity models, I won't show them because that will likely lead to panic, they have a much stronger hurricane here, and so it delays this turn to the north, and you have the southern track here becoming more likely. The sooner this is able to organize, the more west this will go. The more time it takes to organize, the more east this will go. And this is largely due to what you're seeing on the sounding here. You have winds out of the southeast in the lower levels. That if that makes up a higher percentage of the steering layer, then that will mean that the storm will likely track further to the north earlier on. Because once it is able to deepen, it will turn a little bit more to the west here, but it will already be rounding the ridge here, and we're going to look at the mid-level flow, because you can see you have this mid-level trough over Texas, and then you have the ridge here that is rounded around here, and that is largely due to this trough. And actually, another thing that you need to be looking at here is how strong this trough actually ends up being. If it is weaker, then this has less of an influence on Laura's track. If it is stronger, then it will, push Laura further to the north. And that actually is also related to how strong Laura is. If Laura is stronger earlier, then it will have outflow that pushes back at this trough, and this trough will likely be pushed back further into the Texas High Plains here, and the storm will likely want to go further west. This also has another effect. If the trough is further to the west, and Laura is also further to the west, the mid-level shear that some models are forecasting here will be less of an issue here, and the storm will likely be much stronger than what the northernmost solution is. So there's a big divide in the overall intensity guidance, because if you have, when I illustrate this on the National Hurricane Center track, if you have the trough imposing mid-level shear here, if it's a little closer, then Laura will likely be sheared upon approach to the Louisiana-Texas coastline here. However, if this trough is pushed back by Laura because Laura is much stronger in this region here, which is possible that this does happen, it's equally possible that both solutions happen here, then the trough will be able to impose more shear and kind of level off the intensity as this approaches to the Texas-Louisiana border here, and would lead to a more northward track. This will be figured out. All this intensity uncertainty will be likely figured out by tomorrow around this time as this moves quickly into the Gulf of Mexico. Hurricane watches are up from the Bolivar Peninsula in Galveston all the way to the southwestern half of Louisiana's coastline here, and tropical storm watches are up, understandably, for the majority of the Louisiana coastline here, and storm surge watches are also up for the entirety of the Louisiana coastline and Port Bolivar and a little further south here on the Texas coastline. And so, if you are anywhere from Matagorda Bay, this is not explicitly shown in the National Hurricane Center track, and I would also like to mention that the National Hurricane Center track forecast and the cone is a fixed width here. So you have a width on both sides that is an average of the overall track error that the National Hurricane Center has. It does not represent the total uncertainty that this may have, and a lot of model runs have shifted further to the west here because of Laura being possibly stronger. And so this cone will likely move around some, and you really need to be prepared all along from Matagorda Bay all the way into the southwestern Louisiana coastline, because there is a limit to how east this can go, but there is also a limit to how west this can go, but that limit is further removed from the overall track of the cone. And so if you are anywhere along the northeastern Texas coastline, or you are along the southwestern Louisiana coastline, you need to be preparing for what may be a very powerful hurricane here. National Hurricane Center in their discussion also mentions that this intensity of 105 miles per hour at landfall here is a conservative estimate by the National Hurricane Center, and this is due to the uncertainty regarding how organized Laura is and some of the statistical models and the overall intensity guidance being a little lower on Laura than what the dynamical models, which are the HWRF, GFS, European, etc., on Laura, showing a much stronger hurricane and a much stronger hurricane to the west here. So the scenarios that play out are as follows. You have a weaker hurricane that takes longer to organize in here and tracks largely along the center of this forecast track and hits somewhere near the Texas-Louisiana border, and or a even weaker system that tracks into the central Louisiana coastline and is not able to strengthen too much. The possibility remains for rapid strengthening. If this is able to rapidly strengthen earlier here, then a stronger system would tend to ride the ridge a little further to the south and would go into the Houston metro area, or it would go just south of the Houston metro area and would track into these regions and would likely be a severe hurricane by the time it reaches this area. If Laura is able to intensify quicker, I'm going to say this again, this will be able to track further to the west, and you will have a cone by the National Hurricane Center that will shift to the west. You can imagine this region of the cone shifting, 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 miles to the west here, or, in the other direction. So if you are outside of the cone, I also want to illustrate the possibility of hurricane force winds. This is the National Hurricane Center forecast product on wind speed probabilities. See, you have a chance of hurricane force winds on both sides of this cone. So if you are in these regions that have a more than zero shot at hurricane force winds here, you need to be preparing accordingly. And if you are in the region of less than zero tropical storm force winds, you need to be preparing accordingly. And that stretches even further along the coastline. You have a stretch from the map just north of Corpus Christi all the way to the Mobile, Alabama area. If you are along this stretch of coastline, you need to be preparing and watching Laura very closely here. The center may not track over you, but the storm may be large enough to impact you. This is a problem, and you need to be very serious about preparing for it. Do not be surprised if you have mandatory evacuation orders issued along the Texas coast and into the southwestern Louisiana coast, where the cone is most concentrated here. Please refer to your local officials, and if you have any evacuation orders or any, preparation orders from your local officials or your state governments, please do heed them, because this could be a powerful hurricane. The National Hurricane Center explicitly states that a Category 2 is likely on the lower end of the potential for this storm. Please, please do prepare, and please do listen to your local officials. And stay tuned to your local National Weather Service offices for the latest regarding Laura. And check back in tomorrow for how organized the system is emerging from Cuba. I'm going to leave you with the visible shot here. Please refer to your local National Weather Service office. And as always, stay safe, and thanks for watching.